Hi, I'm Paul Malafite, studying business administration with a concentration in social innovation at the Fordham Gabelli School of Business. And this semester, I've been given the incredible opportunity to study abroad here in London. Today, we'll be delving into the world of AI and examining its intersections with finance, employment, and importantly, ethics. On this journey, we'll be joined by Greg Minson, Vice Chair of the Fordham London Advisory Board, Lidham Unates, Generative AI Innovation and Transformation Executive, Andrew McLennan, Managing Director and Global Head of Technology, Private Alternative Assets at Nuveen, and finally, Dr. Jamie Woodcock, Fordham Faculty and Professor of Ethics in Business. Thank you so much for your attention, and please enjoy.
A huge thanks to Fordham for hosting and for bringing this together. I also want to thank the panel here. Coincidentally, I know 2/3 of the panel, and Jamie, it's been a pleasure meeting you over the last couple of days as we prepared for this. So in terms of format, we have probably 5 or 6 questions that I'm going to go over with the panel. It's meant to be very informal. So, please, there's going to be a section, we're going to try to allot time towards the end of the panel for Q&A, probably 10 or 15 minutes. But if there's any questions you have in the interim, please feel free to interject, raise your hand, get our attention. Like, this is not meant to be very formal whatsoever. So let's try to make it as interactive as possible, and that will make it more enjoyable, I think, for everybody as well. So without further ado, I think I'll start with the questions. I'm going to ask Andy the first question. I'm also going to ask the panelists to kind of add if they have anything they want to add as well. But Andy, let's just talk about AI and finance, just to start with that broad topic. You have over 20 years of experience, in the finance industry, working at Goldman. You're now at Nuveen. We spent some quality time together, working together. When you think about AI and finance, how is it currently being deployed in the finance industry? And if you were to crystal ball, how do you think it's going to evolve over the next 3 to 5 years?
Sure. No, thanks for inviting me as well to be here. It's great to talk to you all. Happy to answer any questions you have. So yeah, it really depends what you mean, because AI is not new. It's been here for a long, long time, decades. I did AI back in my PhD before we really called it AI. But when you think about it, it's really producing a mathematical model and using input data and the model to give outputs and outcomes. That's the real thing. And so the key thing, though, is you have to have good quality data. Putting a bad model on top of data doesn't mean anything. So when you think about finance, where do we have most data? Well, it tends to be public markets. So the public markets are much further ahead than the private markets in how they adopt AI, just because they have a lot more data. But also, a thing to remember is most people in the businesses don't really know anything about AI. The people who know it are more the technical people, the quants, the technologists. And so when people are coming up with ideas of how they can use AI, the first obvious use case is what will help the technologists, aka writing faster code. What will be helping middle office, like finding information from documents. This kind of efficiency level. That's kind of where the businesses have generally applied AI to start with, to kind of extract insights and information to make people more efficient. But it's more on the operational side. Over the last X many years, though, there has been a pivot to try and drive AI into more of the revenue-generating sides. So identifying trade opportunities in the public markets, or identifying which kind of buildings we should acquire, or how we should structure our deals. So it's slowly moving into other parts of the revenue-generating side. Another thing in finance, though, is we don't have to build it all in-house. Over the last X many years, there's been a big push in technology startups really to try and digitize the whole process. So we've been looking at one recently where you basically drag and drop your Excel cash flows, and it does the whole underwriting process. So the whole of IBD can be digitized almost now. And so these things are coming. So when you're thinking about how we're using it, you have to bear in mind there's a lot of people throwing a lot of dollars in many different ways in finance, both on the operational, revenue generating, efficiencies, in-house, ex-house. And so there's a lot of things we can do.
And Andy, how do you think about, when you think 3 to 5 years forward, and what the building blocks that are being put in place today, like where do you think where do you think this could take us, over the next 3 to 5 years?
So there's a lot of famous people, so Sam Altman and so forth, have said they can't predict beyond 5 years because the world is just moving so fast. So the way I see it is there was a pre-internet and a post-internet time, but it took 20 years. Then there's a pre-mobile phone and a post-mobile phone and smartphone, and it had maybe 10 years. It's now a pre-GPT, post-GPT model. And so it's happening so much faster. And so things will just be very different in a year's time, 2 years' time. The thing that was happening, though, is all of the value that was created 2 or 3 years ago on all of these large language models is being commoditized. And so it's just what was a year ago that was really hard, cost millions of dollars, is now you can do it basically for free on your mobile. So the speed of innovation is coming through. So anything you can think about that a computer probably should be able to do that, it will do it. That's the thing. And so if I was thinking about where I should spend my time, it's less about kind of focusing on what we need to do now, but try and think about if you were running the world in 5 years' time, what would you want to be doing?
I mean, one more question I have for you, and that sort of resonated when you talk about data and data quality and noisy data versus good data. And I think there's this perception that data is sort of free and everybody, it should just happen. Like when you think about data sets, like what are the things that you're looking for when you think about rich data sets that you can really leverage?
Yeah, so most companies have said they're doing digital transformation for the last decade, and most haven't really. Most of them, it's all like fluff. And so when you think about it, what is digital transformation in the olden days meant to be doing? It's about trying to get a handle on your data and put it into a database, so then you can do insights on it. Public markets are better. Private markets, people are still running around in Excel. Generally, most businesses, private equity, private credit, they run most of their business in Excel, because if you're only running $1 billion and you're only running 5 or 10 deals, you can generally keep it in your head. So they've never been incentivized before to put the data in. But you can't run machine learning and AI on top of Excel, really. So this is actually a forcing function on a lot of firms to actually get their data in good shape. And so how we're doing it is we're still going through what is our performance, what's our AUM, what's our kind of key things that we should have sorted out a long time ago. We're now just driving that through because we have to. And the businesses are not, and before they said, well, I just know what I own because it's in my Excel, it's what I owned last month. Now they're really focused on getting it in, because once you get the data in, you can then say, where are we invested? So one of the examples we're looking at the moment is we do something called impact investing, where you find parts of a city that you don't really want to live in because of X, Y, Z reasons, but they're great opportunities to go in, work with the government to renovate that part of the town. So it might not have green spaces, it might not have medical facilities, it might not have schooling. So if you can identify those places, go in, redevelop the sites, and put in new buildings with green spaces and things like that, you can improve the societal benefit to society. But to do that, you need lots of spatiotemporal data around crime rates, education rates, tons of publicly available data. But you also need to know what your existing portfolio is, because you don't want concentration risk of too much stuff in one place. So you end up having massive, massive quantity of data in time. And so if you use AI on that, you can identify opportunities, but then because it's temporal, you can identify the benefit to society and quantify the benefit post the investment. So did employment rates go up? Did education go up? Did health go up? You can quantify that. And so these are things we can start doing.
And so you touch upon like the complexity of the data set, and like the last question, which I'm sure is a question everybody has in their mind, is like, well, how does this impact me? Well, that's the last question of the panel, so that everybody sticks around. But this whole idea of there's a lot of human beings that are going to be required to make this work. And so I think we'll touch on it towards the end, but I think there's a lot to do, and machines can't just start doing things without a lot of human intervention, but both up front and then interpretation at the back end. So we'll dive deeper into that.
And just on that though, it's things have changed throughout history. As in, there was a case before where there wasn't printers, there was printers. There wasn't a computer on your desk. Now there is a computer on your desk. There wasn't a smartphone. And so things have changed. People's jobs do change. So you shouldn't be worried about the changing job environment. What I did as an intern is probably different to what you're doing as an intern, because the capabilities, technology and data-wise are just different now. It doesn't mean that we don't need interns, we don't need employees. It's just the job you're doing now will be different than what we did when we were your age.
Yeah, you're not going to send faxes. or check your voicemail like I had to do when I was your age. But anyway, we'll get to that towards the end. But before we move on to the next topic, Dina or Jamie, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one thing that I think is really, really important in the comment you made, which is being careful to talk about AI, because there's a risk that it becomes a kind of catch-all explanation without any justification of the processes that are involved. And so I think when we dig into some of these details, it's useful to talk about what particular technology we're talking about. Because I often think about this, I mean, many universities are worried about the application of AI in various ways, but don't think about grammatical checking and spell checking as a form of AI. And so to kind of step away from the general terms, which I think you did, I think is a really important thing to do, of like, what are these technologies, who paid for them, how were they developed, how are they used, is really crucial in these discussions, right?
Because it's just a mathematical model with some assumptions trained on some data. You train on different data, you get different outputs. Use a different model, you get different outputs. And so the key thing is, what is your business problem? What are you trying to solve? And then work back from that to figure out what data you need. And then when you've got the data and the question, you can figure out what is the right model to do that.
Yeah. And then your outputs are different. It could be, I don't know if you guys heard, but my watch went off. Just a different form of AI. But you could have language outputs. You can have calculation, component outputs as a component of the suite of tasks that AI does. So there's a ton of different outputs as well. Gina, do you want to add to that, or?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Well, I have the next question for you,
Sure.
if you don't mind. But Andy touched upon adoption challenges, and I touched upon it a little bit as well in terms of the concept of data and it being free, et cetera. But when you think about companies and how they evolve over time to start adopting, and even universities for that matter, what is some of the, resistance to AI adoption do you think, each company needs to overcome in order to really adopt an AI and use it to its fullest capacity?
Thank you, Greg. Great question. Maybe a few sentences on my background, because I think this question is very close to my heart. I spent about 26 years in disruptive technologies, and half technical, half business, about a third in management consulting and the rest in industry. Almost 11, 12 years with Microsoft, where I was part of their AI journey, starting from Microsoft research, AI engineering, etc. And I was also part of the team that launched ChatGPT, and my peer developed GitHub Copilot. So yeah, I'm one of those guilty ones in the kitchen cooking these solutions. So it has been a privilege to observe tens, if not hundreds of companies, mostly Fortune 500 companies, going through these transformations, and not just AI, but also XR or whatever, generative AI. I helped with the OpenAI partnership as well. And I think I am a very passionate technologist, but I would like to say technology is the easy part. It's a bit like math. It will work. If it doesn't work today, it will work tomorrow. Where it all needs to start is the humans. And that's the way I would answer. I wouldn't even use the term resistance, respectfully. It's just human nature, intimidation, or some kind of insecurity. Will my skills be obsolete? I mean, I was in the kitchen that cooked these solutions for years, Power Platform, you name it, all sorts of AI solutions. And yet, I also experienced it as an employee, because you wake up one day and your job is augmented and you have to rethink your job description. I was fortunate to write my job descriptions. So I was one of those very fortunate employees of today to always updates, and Microsoft gave us that freedom. So I think it will be one of your kind of amazing aspects of your work life as well. But to answer the question more concretely, I would say it's very, in a way, it's actually quite practical. Make it the people's baby. So, for instance, I spent about 6 months with a Fortune 500 company called Schneider Electric. The CEO asked me to do a generative AI scan. I worked with 200 senior leaders, hosted 60 workshops in 1 month, July, which is quite a challenge in a French company, I have to say. And these amazing people themselves came up with 200 Gen AI use cases, ruthlessly filtered. I presented to the board and XCOM in August, got the full green light. This time, September, October, I just led, I was an enabler, but they prepared their implementation plans, 15-month implementation plans. And I act just like a VC, like, okay, if you deliver your use cases quarter by quarter, you get more money. You don't get your budget for 15 months in advance. You have to show the implementation. So that's what we did. And during that time, everybody was super happy, etc. I raised my hand proactively to the CEO and the chief digital officer to say, could I please work with all your HR and training leaders in the company? It's a 130,000 people company, it's a big one. So that I can help them create their proactive, compassionate workforce transformation plans to manage this impact. Because when people talk, everybody is talking about how to implement AI, this use case, that use case. And the reality is, we are talking about a productivity gain of 20 to 30% across the board. And if you have off-the-shelf tools like Midjourney or Copilot, the ROI is 800 to 1,000%. It's a no-brainer, and then there are the bespoke ones. Now, those types of numbers in a corporate environment mean billions of euros or dollars or whatever. But it doesn't mean you lay off 30% of your workforce. It doesn't work like that. So the CFOs of such companies need to understand, okay, first of all, I won't even be able to monitor some of the ROI. So to answer that question, how do we manage? Number one, make it their baby. Involve the people. They prepare their use cases. They prepare their prioritization and plans. Number two, I would suggest work with the HR and training leaders. So everybody understands, okay, how can I inspire my team, the managers or individuals? What's my career development going to be? And then people are excited. So I think the human part, having a data AI school, I had a team called Data AI School in my teams for quite a few years because it's so important. By profile, we have to train. Those are some of the, how do we overcome the resistances or intimidation. Culture is very important. I would say that starts at the top. You can't change the culture bottom up, at least not in my experience for 26 years. Collaboration, open communication. If people don't collaborate, if they're in silos, their data will be in silos because that's how the politics work. Those types of things. And of course, I don't want to forget, Greg, there are the technical challenges. I think those are the easier parts, like data and so on. And of course, operationalization of responsible AI. Everybody wants to feel good about their work. And if something goes wrong, they want to know, how am I going to manage the risk? How am I going to manage the crisis? So that's super important too. Sorry for that long wind. I could talk for hours on that question, as you can see.
I was fascinated. I'm fascinated that Schneider, for a few reasons, but I'm fascinated they actually commissioned this study.
Thank you.
I mean, it's amazing, and the output is amazing. And so when you think, I love organizational design. That's what I really enjoy doing, is thinking about organizations and how they have to adapt for a new opportunity, but also just, how, technology, in this example, how technology is going to impact their teams. And so you think about Schneider, they have 200 different initiatives, let's say most of them are, enacted over time and do what they intend or what the people intend them to do. How is that going to, when you think about the skill sets within the company, how is that going to shift the skill sets?
Massive. So Gartner, for those who might be interested, first of all, I am not just here. I'm happy to follow up offline. This is a very important topic to me. Gartner has a fantastic framework, a matrix that could be applied to organizations as a whole or team by team, like business unit by business unit. And the matrix is about, okay, Here is, let's say, a product that Schneider phases out. So the product won't be available in the field, in the countries anymore, but there are customers who are still using it. So nobody wants to work for that product because they know they'll lose their job. I can use automation there. So let's say the worst case scenario is that. And the matrix has all these things where on the opposite corner, you have the most cutting edge, highest demand, biggest business impact one, which is, for instance, in my case, I had PhDs working on it, generative design. Because if you can crack that, you can disrupt your industry. Generative design means using generative AI to design printed circuit boards, interior of this room. Nobody has cracked it yet, but it's so powerful. So all that matrix, basically my recommendation to my clients or anybody I work with is, okay, where are you? Even your data AI team will fall in different boxes in that matrix. What is the journey for these teams going to look like? And that's the only way. And it has to be a living journey because it's not static. It's changing every day almost if you follow the AI news, if you can.
And do you think that's where companies fall down when in their implementation, is not to take a step back and understand, you know, the training people are going to need, but also the skill sets, the future skill sets that are going to be required in the company? Or
I think, well, that's another, and I would love to also hear your views. I think there are maybe a couple of buckets of companies, at least I'm coming across. One is shockingly still thinking, oh, Gen AI, is it a hype or is it real? Good luck if you have a C-level executive talking like that. And I'm sorry to say, but you know, these companies, Microsoft's, AWS, are pretty smart people. If they're investing 20 billion into a technology, it will deliver, and it's already delivered. So there's those, and I'm not criticizing. It's just that either employees need to gently manage upwards and wake up the organization. So that's one. Then there is almost the opposite spectrum where the C-level executives are, where's my AI plan? What are you doing about it? Which is majority of who I engage with. Across the board, I completely agree with you, Greg. There are so few people talking about the workforce. What am I going to do about my people? And that's where I think there's a huge responsibility. The second area that I think people are still not grasping is responsible AI. And not just talking about it. Is it ethical? Is it this actually implementing, operationalizing it, making it part of your life, product life, processes, business life, because it will go wrong. It's just how this technology works. If you're prepared, you'll manage the crisis well.
that's a great segue into our next series of questions. But before I do that, Jamie or Andy, do you want to add anything to what Dina said?
You explained it very well. Just a quick one, that it really is driven from the top down. So if the C-suite and the leadership aren't bought in, then no matter how much you're fighting from below, it's not going to make any difference, because at some point someone's going to pay for it. And if the C-suite aren't willing to give additional dollars to pay for the innovation, then it can't go anywhere. And if they're not willing to, because it's equal sides, you either invest in it for the benefit in the future, or you have to cut costs. And a lot of places who are not yet bought into it, they still think it's hype. They don't want to reduce their headcount to save money, but they also don't want to invest in it to generate more revenue. So that's the challenge. But yeah, it's 20% tech, 80% culture and people, getting them on board. And a lot of people in the C-suite, they may be near to retirement age, and so they may not even want to go through this fight if they can tap out. And so, whereas you guys are here, you have the time to learn this stuff. You have the time to be the innovators. So when you come through, you actually have a voice at the table.
May I add one thing? I think I missed something quite important in my opinion. It's also enabling the employees, the teams to experiment, play around with these technologies. So I see another spectrum as part of these challenges. On one side, the CIOs, CTOs enable compliant IT. So people are empowered and they can try and innovate with this. So they are not scared of them. It becomes part of their thinking process, which is great. On the other end of the spectrum, I also see quite often, I mean, more than one would like, constraints of the CIO or CTO office where either they don't have the budget or the knowledge of these tools, the latest tools, and they are scared to death that something will go wrong. So that is not compliant IT, that's red tape. And that actually suffocates the innovation culture in the company. If people are clueless about, let's say, what Copilot is, you can only go backwards, I'm sorry to say. So that's a big one, actually.
Yeah, I think maybe one thing just before segueing into talking a bit more about ethics is, I also think it's really important to remember that there have been processes of organizational change before this, and there is a wealth of knowledge, both practical in industry and in the academic literature, about what successful processes of organizational change should involve. And one of the things that comes out really, really clearly in the literature is it's about different senses of justice in these processes. Do people feel like they're being consulted? Do they have the right information? Are they being included in the processes? And I think there's a risk that we can see new technology as so different to the processes of organizational change we've had before that we forget all the things that people have learned through other organizational processes and try and rush ahead or try to be as quick as possible. And one of the comments that I want to make about resistance to these processes is sometimes this can be seen as a kind of, how could somebody not want to take on this new technology? But actually different parts of organizations might have genuine insights about the pitfalls or the problems with technology, that if we're not listening to resistance or counterclaims about technology in organizations, we can miss something about the knowledge that's developed from people, at the shop floor, at the kind of, can we say there's a coal face in finance, at the kind of like numbers face of finance, about how these things work in practice. And I think, we should learn those lessons about communication, about understanding organizations if we want to change them.
No, it's a really good point. Really good point. And I guess product design 101 is to go to the end user and say, what do you need? What do you do? How do you do it? So that's really important.
Just a point on that though as well is if you're a large organization, there is more red tape, but because these large organizations can't get it wrong. If they have one big blow up, they lose their reputation, they go to zero. Whereas startups, they can take much more risk because there's a much greater upside, but there's so many more startups that they can blow up and no one's going to notice. So it's a consideration on your risk tolerance.
Well, this is a good, we're already, this is all derivatives of an ethical conversation. So this is great. It's a great introduction, Jamie, to what we want to talk about with you. And, AI can and is a force for good, but there's also, some issues around it as well. So when you think about, ethical AI in the context of finance, what are some of the things that you think we all need to think about?
So I think really there are 2 points I want to make about this. And the first is that finance as an industry is an industry that is, as we've talked about in terms of Excel spreadsheets onto other kinds of techniques, is already a quantified industry. And industries where it's easy to quantify things, it's particularly susceptible to applying these tools. There are some industries that it's harder to think about how these tools can be applied. And so in a way, if you're interested in ethics of AI, finance matters because it's a place where many of these tools will be developed. And as we know about the history of technology at work, the spread is uneven, but where successes happen, it sets the tone for how technology gets used elsewhere. The other point that I want to make is about the ethics of technology more broadly, that technology is never neutral. Tools are never neutral. And I think sometimes when we look at mathematical tools in particular, we can lose sight of the forces that shape them into being. Now, the point that I'm trying to make by this is who designs a tool and who pays for that tool, and then how that tool is used in practice shapes the kind of tool that we get at the other side. And so if mistakes are made or unethical choices are made, we start to get kinds of technology that have those ethics written into them in various ways. And one of the risks with finance, I think, is that we write the imperatives that dominate finance as an industry into those tools in particular ways and don't see that there could be alternative uses. Or we see that perhaps other industries could use different kinds of tools and we import finance tools into other kinds of industries. And so I think it's really, really important, particularly for those of you thinking about going into industry in different ways, to think about what kinds of uses this technology could have, but also that the technologies themselves could be different in different ways. And this is one of the kind of difficulties of technology, is we see it as a linear process. You know, we don't see the routes where things could have been different, or the kind of dead ends and the cul-de-sacs of technology. But we are in a moment where there are different ways we can think about doing these things. And I think that's why the discussion is so exciting, right? It's not ended already, but I am a cynic of technology, so I worry very much about who is making the decisions and why they're making them.
So how do you put the right governance around it? Like, how do you make sure that those decisions are being made as ethically as possible?
So I think risk of sounding overly European and British in a North American university context, I think often this is about democracy. And we don't often think about democracy in the context of workplaces. We think of democracy as being a thing that happens outside of workplaces. And this was kind of the point I was trying to make with organizational change, is if you don't ask people who are going to have to use that technology or have that technology used on them what kinds of technology they want, their voices won't be embedded into that technology. It will be the people who are worried about the bottom line, the people who are worried about the return. And that will shape the ethics of that technology. And so I think it's really important that we think about all those different voices and different experiences of technology. And I guess as a slight aside to this, I don't know the technology you were talking about at the beginning, but as somebody who has lived in neighborhoods that are often not considered to be the neighborhoods that people want to live in, there's a question of what are the metrics that are being measured, right? What happens to those people in neighborhoods that suddenly look better? You know, do they get to enjoy those benefits, or do they get moved out into sink estates? Is thinking about what possible things could go wrong as well as the possible benefits. But I'm, don't know enough about this technology to say that's what's happening. But it's about asking those questions, right?
So Dina, I guess when you were in Schneider as an example, when you think about some of the things that Jamie just mentioned, was there a vetting structure within Schneider that considered the ethics of some of the things that were proposed?
So I led what we call operationalization of responsible AI at Microsoft, Accenture, and Schneider. Schneider was more in, let's say, early stages, understandably, because it's a manufacturing company, and most manufacturing companies are a little behind software ones. So first of all, there's so much to talk about. I completely agree with you, Jamie, in the sense that it is about democracy. And I will come to the question. I might sound like I'm digressing, but I will come back and explain why. In November, I was at the World Economic Forum's AI Governance Alliance in San Francisco. And there are these 100 people, amazing AI leaders, thinking about how do we do responsible generative AI. And one of the leaders, I won't name a country because it will be too obvious, but Middle East, said, why do we even need to regulate AI? And I was about to fall off my chair, but I also understand and respect his paradigm, his perspective, because he's not coming from a democracy. And if the government tells people what to do or what not to do, what to generate with AI or not generate, then you don't need to regulate anything, right? I mean, so yes and no. Some things are universal. People may not use my face to kill someone, or all of those things are so available, so easy to do. I could buy a few things on Amazon and really create my own drone to kill people today for $800. that's universally, I mean, it has to be controlled. So that's what we are talking about at the big picture. At the more real corporate or company level, there are established principles, frameworks, tools, tooling, impact assessment templates, starting from all the way of incubation stage of any AI solution. It could be a very simple one or a complex one, doesn't matter, that you implement. It's part of your product governance model, product lifecycle. If any of the gates for responsible AI says no, you may not move forward. You have to fix that. It's as simple as that. So we treat responsible AI just like any other business function, HR, finance, or whatever, and it has its scorecard. Are you green or red? It's really that simple. If you treat it as a business function, it works. And if you have crisis, you get your bonus or not based on that. So I think it's just this cultural change, mindset change that we need to evangelize and train our colleagues, our friends, everybody, that responsible AI is everybody's responsibility at organizational level, university, whatever, government level, and individual level. Because nothing is enough. Regulations won't be enough. They are trying to catch up, great, but we know there will be loopholes. I wrote a blog about this, like just last week or the week before. So there's so much to be done, but could be done. I'm optimistic.
I also think there are some ethical principles we can think about with the use of AI. And I realize that some of these might not be popular in a finance context because they, in a sense, shortcut what some of these tools are trying to do. But I think very much, so a lot of my research is about the use of AI in the workplace, so when it's being used in employment relations. And there is a big debate about explainability, that if a tool you can't explain how a tool reached the decision, it shouldn't be used. But in a sense, if you can explain how the tool reached the decision, perhaps then the tool is simple enough that you don't need to use the tool. There's a kind of problem of, yeah, if the technical problem is so vast that you have to use some kind of algorithmic means to be able to come up with solutions, then how can you explain how it came up with them is a kind of black boxing problem. But if we think about the use of some of these tools, how many of us would feel comfortable about being able to get a credit card and not have it explained whether or not we got one, or whether or not we get a mortgage to buy a house, or whether we get a job, whether we're rejected for the job? Is there are some cases where perhaps we can say, if you can't explain how this is used, it has such implications on people's lives that it's not appropriate to use this tool. And that has some controversy perhaps in finance more widely. But we might also want to think that there should be, and responsible AI is probably a part of this, that there is always a human responsible for the decision that is being made. And there are lots of cases in different employment contexts where people say, well, an algorithmic decision has been made, you can't appeal this decision. You know, to not have a process by which we can still have the kinds of interactions we might need to. And like perhaps we could add other things of, you know, how we might have ethical principles in our general life that we might want to be applied into the use of these tools. But for me, explainability is a really important one, right?
Yeah, so that's really the difference between causality and correlation. Because just because two things look and feel and have correlation doesn't mean it's a driver of the cause. And so a classic example is the image classification of, is it a dog or is it a wolf? So they trained it and they compared it, and then they found, yep, it works, everything's good. But then what they really, with causation, found out, a wolf is generally in snowy environments. A dog's generally in non-snowy environments. You put a dog in a snowy environment, they think it's a wolf, not because it's a wolf. And so these are the correlation causation things. So when you're building these models and using your data sets, you need to know what is driving the decisions. Similar thing, if you think about, you've got ChatGPT and other things. If ChatGPT would only been trained on news articles from The Guardian versus trained only on The Telegraph, the outputs would be totally different, because left and right. And so you've got to understand what data is being used to train your data to make sure you actually have the right outcomes. But even if you have clean data and the data is perfect and you're building a model, society might actually tell you the output's wrong. As in, if the numbers say, for example, classic one is, if women are better drivers than men, and the numbers prove that. If it did, hypothetically, society may say, well, we still shouldn't charge women less for car insurance than men. Society said we should be equal. And so you have to take the raw data, take the model, but then society puts its own bias on top to say what does society want the world to look like. So these are all things. And then the final thing on ethics is, even if you get all that correct, if you then come up with an idea and a solution that can basically, say self-driving cars, but really self-driving trucks, as soon as that gets solved in the next few years, we will not need any truck drivers. And so ethically, should we create a technology that takes away hundreds of thousands of people's jobs or not? And that's another question of ethical. Should society allow that to happen or not?
Right. Well, that's a good. I'm conscious of time, but we're starting to touch on the job market, and I think if everybody just reflects on what we just talked about, we've talked about huge complexity. We've talked about technology complexity, data complexity, implementation complexity, ethical complexity. So that should give you some hints about potentially how this may impact the job market of the future. But I want to ask each one of the panelists before we go on to Q&A, which we hope to get to in the next kind of 5 minutes or so. I want to ask each one of the panelists, what they think the impact on the job market would be, especially for graduates. Jane, why don't we start with you? You were the last one with the questions. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so just very briefly, we were joking at the start of this this panel that when I did my PhD 15 years ago, I did it on work, and I was told by all my colleagues this was a very unfashionable thing to study. Why would you study work? Nobody's talking about work anymore. And not to say I predicted anything. I think this is a fluke of being interested in work. But now the debates on work matter to people, and I think it's very, very difficult to predict trends in work. In part because the destruction of one kind of job can often lead to the creation of new kinds of jobs. And we've seen this very, very often with forms of digitalization, that new technology brings with it a series of additional jobs that are required. Jobs get displaced. And I think an important part of this is how much work is now being conducted to train data sets that was never conceived of as a kind of work before. There's an ethical question about how much it's paid, but we could talk about that later on. But I think the major question for me is a kind of social question about work. So we can try to predict what happens, but we should also think that we collectively can have a say over some of these changes. So if truck drivers' jobs disappear, which they may well do, what do we as a society, and what do we as people who play different roles in that society, think that process should look like? Because often the destruction of jobs has led to the destructions of communities. Think of the Rust Belt in the US or parts of the north of England post coal and steel, is we're yet to get right what retraining looks like. And the destruction of huge numbers of jobs, if we don't retrain and support people to do other things, has a big social impact. So these are questions that very quickly move out into much bigger discussions that we should be having, we should be having these discussions more widely, I think.
What's your crystal ball say?
I am much more optimistic. Well, that will happen. I'm not saying that's not going to happen, but I also have a son who's 16 years old, and I was reading some research which predicts, like by 2030, when he'll graduate from university, for example, 1 out of 3 in a team will be a robot or some kind of software automation. And I think that's very likely, if not earlier than that. I think it will be a very exciting workplace for all of us, not just you. I consider myself as well, because what these technologies force us to do is to really, really think hard about the meaning of our lives. What are we passionate about? What do we want to leave behind? Because if you strip away all the grunt stuff, repetitive stuff, whatever that can be done, then we are left with what is purely human. I mean, the irony is when we look at most jobs today, especially our generation, not yours, luckily for you, it's people, the humans are actually like in autopilot or robot mode. You do certain things, you get a paycheck, you do it year after year after year in grind. And that's actually very sad. But we as a society have set up that system, and go on with it. So I think your generation, the future will be so exciting. You will all be writing your own job descriptions probably every few years maximum. And 2 days ago, I was listening to a podcast which was saying, like, people predict that there will be 1 person unicorns. In other words, 1 person will be able to create a $1 billion company by using all these tools. I believe that. So I would encourage you to dream big, think big, and be flexible. Like, if you are doers, if you are creative, if you are collaborative, all those soft skills we keep talking about, and if you're hungry for learning, the sky will be the limit for you. But I also want to add, it's not just the workforce landscape. The education landscape will have to shake up quite a bit too, because right now the standard mass market education system, even the best schools, wherever, UK, US, Singapore, are not preparing us for this type of thinking and doing. We are used to cookie cutter approach. We are used to being robots without calling ourselves robots. Sorry if I...
I'd agree on that quickly. There are some people who like learning and challenging themselves to know stuff. Most people, though, I've noticed, when they finish university, they never learn anything ever again, and they just get on to doing stuff. And so those are the people that's going to be challenged by this new world because it's happening so fast. I created the AI Center of Excellence. I provided all the materials to the firm, and a small fraction has bothered taking any of it up because they're too busy with life. They've got families and children and day jobs. Everyone's busy. And so, but it's up to you guys and everyone else is to find that time, to carve that time. You've spent so long in academia learning it. I'd highly recommend, don't then stop learning. Continue to learn. Every month, every week, every year, find something new, learn. Because you don't really know what you need to learn, but just keep on learning, and then you'll have an opportunity and have a big toolkit so that you can attack anything going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add, and then I want to throw it open to Q&A, is this to me is not about a shrinking workforce, it's about a shifting workforce. And I think people who are nimble and agile and think broadly and are creative and collaborative and all the things that the panelists said, I think it's going to benefit you quite a bit. I think the second thing is that you're young. Like, you should be embracing this technology, and you should be thinking about weaponizing it for good, by the way, but weaponizing it to your advantage, right? You shouldn't be looking at this as a threat. This is a great opportunity, I think, for you, and it's, especially as organizations try to adopt this within their organizations. If you can come in with a skill set, around it, or even an openness to it, I think that's going to put you in very good position. And then just cement this with some facts, and call me cold-hearted or whatever, but the Western population's in structural decline. So as much as I don't think this is going to shrink the need for employees, structurally they're going to be less workers 15, 20 years from now than there are now, right? And so whatever downward pressure there might be on employment, which I don't believe, but whatever downward pressure there might be on employment, you have that structural, at least in the Western world, you have that structural sort of support behind you. So, I think this is an exciting time, and I'd be looking at it that way if I were you guys.